Long before the first sunrise, before the mountains even dared to pierce the sky, the world was a swirling storm of chaos. Seas roared across lands that didn't yet exist. Lightning tore through skies that had no stars, and the wind carried whispers of destruction. Everything was in constant motion, yet nothing found balance. It was a world where fire clashed with water, and the very earth trembled beneath its own uncertainty. And yet, in the midst of this boundless turmoil, a figure appeared not with the force of a hurricane or the weight of a mountain, but with a sly, knowing smile and eyes that sparkled like distant stars. This was the Trickster god, a being both feared and unseen, who danced along the edges of chaos with a mischievous curiosity, unlike other deities who sought to dominate or destroy. The Trickster watched. He laughed as rivers tangled themselves, and mountains toppled into the seas. But beneath the laughter, there was a plan and idea that only he could see. While chaos raged, he observed the tiniest patterns. The way a flame curled around a gust of wind, the rhythm of waves colliding in endless repetition, the brief, fleeting harmony hidden in the discord, and then, in a moment as quiet as the pause, between heartbeats, the Trickster stepped forward. With a flick of his hand, a playful twist of his will, he began to weave threads of order from the madness surrounding him. It wasn't a grand battle, nor a violent conquest. It was a game, a clever, daring dance between chaos and cunning. And little did the world know this god of trickery, laughter, and clever schemes was about to turn the wild, untamed universe into something that could last. As the Trickster god began his subtle work, the world continued its frantic dance of chaos. Mountains toppled into rivers, fires spread across lands that did not yet know life, and winds screamed with no direction. Yet within this wild disorder, he found endless possibilities, the threads of potential hidden in the madness. To the other deities, who had long despaired at the state of the cosmos, he seemed absurd, a being laughing at destruction while secretly arranging it with meticulous precision. But that was the Trickster's genius. He understood that order was not forced. It was coaxed, teased, and revealed through the dance of opposites. His first act of subtle intervention was among the rivers. The waterways, unbridled and violent, tore across barren landscapes, creating floods that erased anything that dared exist. The Trickster, with a grin, dipped his fingers into the frothing currents. He whispered to the water, not with command, but with suggestion, guiding it gently to flow along a course that would nurture rather than destroy. Yet he did so in a way that maintained its wild character meanders. Eddies and rapids remained, for a world without some chaos was not alive. Over time, his influence carved valleys and fertile plains, places where life would one day find a foothold. And all the while, he chuckled at how the rivers seemed to obey while still rebelling, a reflection of the delicate balance he sought. Next, he turned to fire, the element that both gave life and threatened to annihilate it. Flames licked the air and devoured the dry lands, sparking havoc with indiscriminate rage. The Trickster knew he could not snuff out the fire completely. It was a force of creation as much as destruction, but he could teach it rhythm and timing. Through playful tricks, he caused it to burn in patterns, retreating where life might take root, advancing only where renewal was necessary. Villages that did not yet exist in human imagination found safe places for future settlements. Forests found spaces to grow anew, and the smoke rose in gentle spirals, as if dancing to a secret melody only he could hear. Then came the winds, chaotic and untamed, carrying storms that no terrain could withstand. The trickster played with them like a musician with strings, encouraging the gales to swirl in loops, to push storms along paths that prevented total devastation. He laughed as the clouds formed shapes and patterns, teasing the elements into cooperation, even as they resisted. These playful interventions created climates and seasons, a framework for a living world to eventually exist. Without the trickster's cunning guidance, the first life forms, should they ever appear, would have perished before they could thrive. But the trickster did not limit his work to elements alone. He observed the very fabric of reality, noticing how fire, water, and wind clashed, yet created potential for harmony. He began weaving these elements together, encouraging interactions that sparked creation. Volcanic ash enriched rivers, rain cooled burning forests, wind spread seeds to untouched lands. He orchestrated these encounters with a trickster's finesse, allowing outcomes that appeared accidental but were in truth carefully arranged. In this way, the foundations of ecosystems, life cycles, and the raw mechanics of the natural world began to emerge, not perfect, but balanced, teetering on the edge of chaos, yet leaning toward order. Throughout this period, the trickster was often mistaken for a mere observer, a playful deity indifferent to the suffering and destruction all around. Other gods, who favored direct control, viewed him with suspicion. They saw randomness and chance in his actions, failing to perceive the method behind the mirth. They could not understand that chaos itself could be harnessed, that laughter and cunning could shape reality without brute force. The trickster thrived on this misunderstanding, for his true power lay not in imposing his will, but in guiding the universe to reveal its own structure. As centuries passed, signs of his interventions became clearer. Rivers settled into valleys that resembled threads in a tapestry. Forests began to spread in patterns of growth and retreat, and weather systems found a rhythm, albeit an unpredictable one. Yet the trickster never let order become rigid. He knew that a world too structured would stagnate, lose its magic, and die. So he preserved pockets of unpredictability, sudden storms, mysterious whirlpools, and volcanic eruptions, all reminders that the universe was alive, restless, and playful. It was through this balance that life, when it finally emerged, would inherit a world both ordered enough to survive and chaotic enough to thrive. The trickster's next challenge was even more ambitious: life itself. He experimented with forms, nudging the elements to combine in ways that produced sparks of consciousness. In secluded corners of his newly tamed world, the first plants began to grow. Simple creatures emerged, at first fragile, then resilient, learning to adapt to the subtle rhythms and chaotic surprises woven into the environment. The trickster delighted in the unpredictability of evolution, seeing in each new species a reflection of his own playful ingenuity. Nothing was wasted. Everything was a potential joke, a hidden lesson, or a pathway to discovery. Yet even as life took root, the trickster continued to refine the balance of chaos and order. He instilled cycles of birth and decay, growth and destruction, teaching that even misfortune and chaos had purpose. In this way, he demonstrated a truth that would echo throughout myth: that order is not absence of chaos, but mastery of it. He reveled in the irony that the most orderly systems, ecosystems, Weather, rivers, and life itself were born from playful mischief, clever tricks, and daring interventions that by the end of this era, the world had transformed. What once was a realm of unbridled chaos had become a living, breathing system. Rivers nurtured valleys, fires renewed land, winds carried seeds and cooled the earth, and life, in its first delicate forms, danced to the rhythms set by the trickster. Yet in every corner, hints of his play remained: a lightning strike in a storm, an unexpected flood, a sudden volcanic eruption, proof that the trickster had never abandoned his nature. He had succeeded not by dominating chaos, but by inviting it into a game, showing that the divine could find wisdom and beauty in mischief. And so, the legend of the trickster god spread not through acts of conquest or displays of overwhelming power, but through stories whispered among future generations. He became the god who taught that laughter, cunning, and creativity could shape the world. That chaos was not an enemy to be defeated, but a partner to be understood. From this playful dance between destruction and creation, the universe began to breathe, to grow, and eventually to flourish. The trickster's subtle hand remained invisible, yet his influence was everywhere. A reminder that the most powerful order arises from the cleverest tricks, with the foundations of the natural world taking shape under his playful guidance. The trickster god turned his attention to a new challenge: mankind. For though the rivers ran with purpose and the winds danced in patterns, there was yet no being to witness, to learn, or to be tested by the intricacies of chaos and order. Humans, he decided, would be the ultimate proof of his craft, creatures capable of choice yet susceptible to folly. They would face the unpredictable world he had woven, and through their struggles, his lessons would endure. But unlike other gods who demanded obedience or loyalty, the trickster sought no reverence. He desired curiosity, creativity, and the thrill of discovery. And so he began his careful, subtle interventions, shaping humanity's earliest days with the same cunning he had used on rivers, fire, and wind. In the beginning, humans were fragile, vulnerable to the winds of the elements. A flood could wipe out entire settlements, a storm could scatter families, and famine could strike with little warning. The trickster watched with amusement, for he knew that adversity was not punishment, but opportunity. He introduced challenges that required cleverness rather than strength. When rivers threatened to spill into newly built huts, he caused humans to observe the currents and predict their patterns, discovering simple engineering and planning. When fires swept through plains, they learned to control them, cultivating both warmth and protection. With each natural threat, the humans adapted, developing skills and knowledge that allowed them to survive, and in doing so, they unknowingly played along with the trickster's grand design. Yet the trickster did not stop at survival. He introduced puzzles, riddles, and conflicts that could only be solved with wit and ingenuity. Among the first tribes, he whispered ideas in dreams: how to trap animals for food, how to shape stones into tools, how to weave fibers into clothing. Sometimes he caused misunderstandings, sending two clans toward the same fertile valley, forcing them to negotiate, share, or contend. From these encounters arose lessons in cooperation, diplomacy, and cunning strategy. To the human eye, these events seemed random, even cruel, but the trickster saw them as the rhythm of education, a curriculum of chaos turned into wisdom. Those who observed carefully, who could read the signs in the rivers, winds, and fires, thrived. Those who ignored them struggled, learning harshly the consequences of neglecting order hidden within chaos. The trickster also delighted in creating moral challenges, situations that tested not just intellect, but character. He would set a bounty of ripe fruits on a perilous cliff, accessible only by ingenuity, and then watch as humans decided whether to share, hoard, or compete. He would let a sudden storm separate two parties, forcing them to decide whether to rescue, abandon, or negotiate with each other. These trials, while seemingly mischievous, were carefully designed to cultivate traits of resilience, compassion, and resourcefulness. Through these interactions, humanity began to recognize patterns in chaos, to anticipate outcomes, and to learn that cleverness was as essential as courage. In every mischief he introduced, the trickster left a seed of order, a lesson veiled in unpredictability. As generations passed, humans began to tell stories of the God who watched, who whispered solutions in dreams, and who created chaos that taught more than it destroyed. Legends arose of a being who was neither entirely benevolent nor malevolent, a God who laughed at folly yet guided the clever toward prosperity. In some tales, he appeared as a wandering old man, a jester, or even a cunning animal, always testing, always observing. To the trickster, these stories were a delightful side effect. Humans were beginning to internalize his lessons, passing down the subtle balance between chaos and order through myth, art, and ritual. The more they shared these stories, the more his influence became woven into the fabric of their societies, shaping culture, ethics, and innovation. One of the trickster's most enduring contributions during this era was the invention of language and communication. By planting the first challenges that require cooperation and negotiation, he indirectly encouraged humans to develop ways to share ideas efficiently. Early gestures became symbols, sounds became words, and eventually, language blossomed into a powerful tool. The trickster laughed at the irony. Humans, striving to organize their own lives, were unknowingly organizing the world around them. With language came the capacity for complex thought, planning, and strategy skills that allowed humans to manipulate their environment with unprecedented finesse. Through mischief and subtle guidance, the trickster had transformed his chaotic playground into a testing ground for intellect, wisdom, and foresight. But the trickster's lessons were not always gentle. He knew that learning through ease bred complacency. Therefore, he introduced the unpredictable, the unexpected, the moments that would challenge even the most clever minds. A drought could strike in the middle of harvest. A predator might appear where none were expected. A sudden flood could wash away months of labor. These disruptions, though seemingly cruel, were calculated to push humans beyond instinct into creativity. They learned to store food, build shelters, cultivate immunity to fear, and develop rituals that honored both chance and skill. In essence, every misfortune was a carefully orchestrated experiment, a lesson in reading the hidden order within apparent chaos. One of the trickster's most famous interventions involved the first great human settlement, a thriving village nestled beside a river. To test their ingenuity, he sent a swarm of locusts to devour the crops. Panic spread, but clever villagers observed the patterns of the swarm, noticing that the locusts avoided certain herbs and plants. By planting these strategically, they could divert the swarm's path, saving their harvest. The trickster smiled, for the humans had not just survived, they had learned to manipulate chaos, to turn misfortune into opportunity. Stories of this event passed through generations, celebrated in song and ritual. embodying the trickster's philosophy. In chaos, there is always a path to order for those willing to see it. Over time, humans began to build structures, systems, and societies, each reflecting the lessons imparted by the trickster. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and the human capacity for organization expanded. Yet he ensured that unpredictability remained woven into life. Sudden floods, fires, storms, and conflicts reminded them that control was an illusion and adaptability a necessity. Even as civilizations rose, the trickster's subtle hand guided innovation, art, and science. He was present in every discovery, every strategy, every cunning maneuver. Though humans often attributed their successes to luck, skill, or divine favor, the god of mischief had transformed chaos into a teacher, an ally, and a source of enduring wisdom. The trickster also reveled in the moral dimension of human development. He introduced scenarios where humans faced choices that tested ethics, justice, and empathy. By observing how humans reacted to scarcity, danger, and temptation, he created a living laboratory for virtue. Those who shared resources survived better. Those who hoarded or exploited fell to the consequences of imbalance. The god's philosophy was clear. Life thrives when chaos is met with insight, compassion, and cleverness. He used unpredictability not as punishment, but as a mirror, reflecting human potential back at them. Through laughter, challenge, and subtle intervention, he cultivated societies that could endure the ever-changing whims of the natural world. By the end of this era, humans had evolved from fragile wanderers into resourceful, inventive, and cautious beings. They had learned to anticipate storms, manipulate rivers, control fire, and communicate ideas. Yet, even in their success, the trickster ensured humility. He reminded them through subtle mischief that no system, no city, and no strategy could ever be perfect. Order was always a negotiation with chaos, an art of balance rather than domination. And through every story passed down, every ritual observed, and every challenge overcome, humans carried a reflection of the trickster's essence, a reminder that the universe, like life, was best approached with cunning, curiosity, and a touch of playful audacity. As humans continued to flourish under the subtle guidance of the trickster god, he realized that the next stage of his grand design would require more than simple survival and cleverness. It would demand imagination, culture, and the very essence of what it meant to be human. While the early lessons had taught humans to adapt to rivers, storms, fires, and predators, the trickster saw a deeper potential, the creation of civilization itself. This required encouraging humans not only to manipulate their environment, but to shape it in ways that reflected foresight, creativity, and cooperation. He understood that order born from chaos was not just about survival, it was about identity, society, and legacy. Thus, he began introducing elements that would challenge humans to think beyond the immediate, to consider consequences, and to forge traditions that would carry wisdom through generations. One of his first interventions involved the crafting of structures. Villagers had long built simple huts, primarily for shelter. Yet the trickster whispered in dreams and inspirations the concept of permanence and planning. He encouraged them to observe patterns in the seasons, to understand the stability of different soils, and to experiment with materials that could withstand wind, rain, and the passage of time. Slowly, huts evolved into larger communal buildings, and villages transformed into organized settlements. Streets were laid out according to sun and wind patterns, Walls reinforced with stone and clay, and storage systems were developed for surplus. Food. These advancements were not merely practical, they represented the beginning of foresight and coordination, the birth of engineering born from mischief. The trickster delighted as humans unknowingly followed his guidance, transforming chaos into the order of structured societies. Yet, even as humans built cities, the trickster ensured that unpredictability remained ever present. He introduced challenges that required innovation, sudden floods that threatened grain stores, wildfires that consumed forests used for timber, or pests that devastated crops. Each disaster was not a punishment, but a lesson, a call to refine strategies, develop tools, and create systems that could withstand the unknown. Humans experimented with irrigation, early forms of agriculture, crop rotation, and the domestication of animals. In each success, they discovered principles of planning, foresight, and resilience. Through mischief and subtle tests, the trickster ensured that humans internalized the principle that order is not absolute, it is maintained only through vigilance, creativity, and adaptability. Language and communication, which had already begun to emerge, became central to this next stage of civilization. The trickster encouraged humans to record observations, map territories, and share stories of triumph and misfortune. Oral traditions evolved into symbolic communication, eventually giving rise to early scripts and record keeping. In this way, knowledge became portable, shared, and cumulative. Humans learned from each other across generations, preserving lessons from past chaos and building on them. In the trickster's eyes, these were not mere records, they were the foundations of culture, law, and history. Every written symbol was a testament to his clever orchestration, a reflection of how chaos, when carefully guided, could yield enduring order. Art and ritual soon followed. Humans, having mastered basic survival and societal structures, began to explore expression. The trickster inspired songs, dances, and ceremonies that commemorated the unpredictable forces of nature, the triumphs of ingenuity, and the moral lessons learned through trials. Temples, shrines, and ceremonial spaces emerged, each designed to honor both human effort and the unseen hand of divine mischief. Masks, carvings, and illustrations depicted storms, rivers, animals, and cunning acts, symbolic reminders of the balance between chaos and order. These artistic endeavors were more than decoration. They were educational tools, encoded wisdom, and a means of communicating values and strategy across generations. The trickster watched, amused and satisfied, as humans turned lessons of survival into symbols of culture, creating narratives that reinforced the principles he had instilled. Economy and trade became another area where his influence was evident. As villages grew into towns, humans needed to coordinate resources, negotiate exchanges, and manage surplus. The trickster orchestrated opportunities for ingenuity, a drought in one valley, an abundance of fish in another, a mineral-rich hill near a less fertile plain. Humans had to communicate, plan journeys, and establish systems of barter. Through trial, error, and occasional setbacks orchestrated by the trickster, trade networks expanded, social hierarchies emerged, and the concepts of wealth and resource management took root. Even disputes, which sometimes led to conflict, taught lessons in diplomacy, negotiation, and strategy. The trickster's design was evident. The push and pull of chaos and order created dynamic societies capable of adaptation, cooperation, and growth. Education, though informal, became essential. tool for transmitting these lessons. Elders shared knowledge of patterns in weather, behavior of animals, strategies for survival, and social norms. Children were encouraged to experiment, solve problems, and engage in playful challenges that mirrored the trials the trickster himself had once orchestrated. Through storytelling, humans learned to anticipate outcomes, understand consequences, and recognize the underlying order in apparent randomness. The trickster's philosophy became embedded in cultural memory, cleverness, adaptability, and foresight were virtues, and chaos was not to be feared but studied and understood. The trickster also influenced religion and morality during this period. While humans had initially worshipped the natural forces around them, they began to conceptualize deities as reflections of principles they observed in life forces of order emerging from chaos, tests of ingenuity, and embodiments of moral lessons. The trickster himself was revered, though often in disguise, as a cunning animal, a wandering elder, or a mischievous spirit. Rituals were designed to honor him, celebrate ingenuity, and reinforce ethical behavior. Sacrifices, offerings, and festivals were not just acts of devotion but practical exercises in organization, resource management, and community cohesion. Humans learned that the divine was present in challenges and opportunities alike, and that the universe operated on patterns that could be observed, understood, and respected. Science and technology began to emerge from this foundation. Humans studied the stars, the movements of rivers, and the behavior of animals, applying observation to predict outcomes and optimize survival. The trickster's indirect teachings became the roots of early astronomy, agriculture, and engineering. Tools evolved from simple stones to more sophisticated implements, irrigation systems, and early architectural designs. Each innovation was both a solution to chaos and an expression of order. The trickster's influence was subtle but pervasive. Humans, striving to master their environment, were unknowingly following the curriculum he had laid out for them across generations. Conflict and governance were also shaped by his interventions. As settlements expanded, disputes arose over land, resources, and leadership. The trickster introduced scenarios that encouraged negotiation, strategy, and lawmaking. Tribal councils, mediators, and codified rules emerged as humans sought to manage complexity. Wars, while devastating, became lessons in strategy, diplomacy, and alliance building. Those who adapted survived. Those who failed became stories of caution. The trickster's philosophy was clear. Through the tension between unpredictability and ingenuity, humans would refine systems of governance, learning to balance power, fairness, and flexibility. By the end of this era, civilization had begun to take form in a way that reflected the trickster's vision. Cities with streets, marketplaces, temples, and administrative systems emerged. Humans had mastered agriculture, engineering, and early commerce. They had developed moral codes, storytelling traditions, and rituals that perpetuated the lessons of chaos and order. All of this, however, remained dynamic. The trickster ensured that unpredictability persisted. Natural disasters, political upheavals, and unforeseen events continued to test the resilience and adaptability of societies. In every challenge, humans learned to recognize patterns, apply knowledge, and exercise ingenuity, ensuring that civilization remained vibrant, flexible, and alive. The trickster god, though often invisible, had succeeded. From chaos had sprung a society capable of innovation, reflection, and cooperation. The seeds of technology, culture, governance, and morality were firmly planted, and humans carried the lessons forward, encoded in stories, rituals, and institutions. In the laughter of children solving puzzles, in the negotiations of traders, in the construction of temples and bridges, the echo of the trickster's mischief could be felt. Chaos had been transformed into order, not as a rigid framework, but as a living, adaptable system that reflected the cunning and playful intelligence of its divine architect. Even as generations passed, the presence of the trickster god remained, woven into the fabric of human life, though rarely acknowledged outright. His lessons were embedded in the architecture of cities, the strategies of leaders, and the rhythms of daily survival. Humans, now sophisticated in their understanding of the world, often did not recognize the invisible hand that had shaped their ingenuity, cooperation, and culture. Yet in every act of cleverness, in every adaptation to unforeseen challenges, the echo of the trickster's mischief resonated. He had taught humanity not just to respond to chaos, but to anticipate it, to use it as a canvas upon which order could be painted. And so, the trickster's legacy endured, subtle yet unmistakable, influencing civilizations long after his direct interventions ceased. One of the most enduring lessons of the trickster was the recognition that order was never static. Even the most organized society could be disrupted by unpredictable forces, storms, famines, or political upheavals. To navigate this instability, humans developed systems of resilience. They learned to store surplus food, build fortified structures, and cultivate versatile skills. Trade networks expanded, linking distant communities and creating interdependence. Governance evolved from tribal councils to formalized hierarchies, always tested by the unpredictable tides of fortune. Through these systems, humans internalized the principle that chaos was not an enemy but a partner, an ever-present force that, when respected and understood, could sharpen ingenuity, strengthen communities, and inspire progress. Cultural expression, too, bore the imprint of the trickster. Songs, dances, and festivals celebrated both triumphs and lessons learned from disaster, reinforcing the collective memory of resilience. Stories of cunning heroes, mischievous spirits, and unpredictable events were passed from generation to generation, serving as both entertainment and moral guidance. Rituals and ceremonies maintained a dialogue between humans and the forces that shaped their world, reminding communities that the line between chaos and order was fluid, and that wisdom lay in navigating both with creativity and foresight. Art, architecture, and literature became living repositories of the trickster's philosophy, encoding his lessons into every brushstroke, carving, and word. Education evolved as the ultimate instrument of the trickster's vision. Elders, scholars, and storytellers taught the young not merely facts or skills, but the mindset required to navigate uncertainty. Problem-solving, critical thinking, and adaptability became central values, ensuring that each generation could face new challenges with ingenuity. Knowledge was no longer static. It was cumulative, passed down, and constantly refined. Every invention, discovery, and cultural advancement was a testament to the trickster's influence, illustrating how chaos could catalyze progress when guided by cleverness and persistence. Even human morality and law carried traces of the trickster's touch. Codes of conduct, legal systems, and social norms reflected the balance between freedom and responsibility, opportunity and consequence. Humans learned to negotiate conflicts, mediate disputes, and exercise justice with both fairness and cunning. Stories of deception and cunning illustrated the dangers of rigid thinking and blind obedience, encouraging communities to value creativity, critical judgment, and adaptability. The trickster's philosophy that rules were guides, not chains, permeated every institution, teaching humans to balance structure with flexibility and foresight with spontaneity. In time, humans began to mythologize the trickster himself. He appeared in countless forms, sometimes as a clever animal, sometimes as a wandering spirit, occasionally as a playful deity whose actions were both a puzzle and a lesson. His stories were told around fires, within temple walls, and across marketplaces, each retelling emphasizing the core truth: chaos and order were not opposites but partners in creation. By embracing unpredictability, humans could shape their world. By mastering cunning and creativity, they could turn disorder into enduring achievement. The trickster's presence, though hidden, became inseparable from the very essence of civilization. The ultimate triumph of the trickster god lay not in direct control, but in empowerment. Humans had moved from simple survival to building cities, cultivating knowledge, and shaping societies capable of sustaining complexity and growth. Each act of ingenuity, every lesson learned from misfortune, was a continuation of his work. Chaos, once feared and destructive, had been transformed into a source of inspiration, testing human limits and encouraging endless innovation. The trickster's mischief had become a mirror for human potential, revealing that within unpredictability lay opportunity, and within challenge lay growth. His invisible hand guided humanity to understand that the world's inherent unpredictability was not an obstacle but a gift, a stage upon which creativity, wisdom, and resilience could shine. So, even today, the trickster's legacy endures. Every invention, every act of problem-solving, every story passed down through generations reflects the ancient truth he imparted, that chaos and order are entwined, that mischief can be a teacher, and that cleverness, courage, and imagination are the forces that shape the destiny of civilizations. The trickster god, who once turned the tumult of the universe into lessons for humanity, continues to live through the ingenuity, adaptability, and creativity of those who dare to navigate the uncertain, transforming the world one clever act at a time.